You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and this is 6 Degrees of John Keel.
Hello and welcome to the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Barbara Fisher, and with me is
Morgana.
Tonight, we're welcoming Zelia Edgar back. We're very happy to have her back, and we're talking with her about her new book, Just Another Tinfoil Hat Presents, which just came out, a month ago, month and a half, 2 months?
Something like early January.
Okay. All right. See, time has no meaning anymore. With this pandemic, I just live in this timeless realm where all time is now. So I had no idea. I just knew I just read it and it was good. So
it was excellent.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you so much for having me back on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
We are thrilled to have you.
We are. And we both had so much fun reading this. I think we have 3 copies between us because I got a physical copy from Morgana. I have a physical copy and I have a Kindle copy.
You also got me a Kindle copy.
Oh, well then 4.
Have until the physical one got shipped. So we have 4.
Right. Okay, we have 4 copies. Well, maybe one of us will give away a physical copy.
I'll definitely pass mine on to my
Chris.
best friend or Chris. Yes, yeah. I was going to pass it to Brittany, but Chris works too.
Oh, Brittany would like it too.
Yeah.
I could pass her my copy, which has notes in it. She might be entertained by that.
That's true.
First off, I want to say one thing. You should have named it, or I would have named it, the High Strangeness's greatest hits, or the greatest hits of High Strangeness, because that's what it is. It is all the great cases, all the big cases. And what's really interesting to me is many of them I've read before, because I'm old and I've read all this stuff for a very long time. But you still got 1 or 2 in there that I didn't know. And the way that you wrote the descriptions of them and the way that you presented the cases was very clear and very concise. And yet you did not leave out details. I appreciated that so much.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm seriously beaming here. That is high praise, especially to hear that I managed to find and uncover 2 new cases for you. You know, that is just, I've heard that from a few people, and I have to admit that makes my day. Just because I totally love, when I find a case that I haven't heard of before, it's thrilling, because it's true. I've been in this for a long time. I've seen a lot of, it's true, the greatest hits. So when I can find something really obscure, I'm like, hey, this is something new. So seriously, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You are very welcome.
I also loved that you did all of that and you made this entertaining and gripping.
Yes.
This is just really fun to read. Bless all paranormal writers and theorists and thinkers, but some books are stodgier than others, and this one is a treat.
Yes.
Jeez, thank you so much. Seriously, guys, I'll probably say this a million times, but just thank you. Because I take this material very seriously, is the truth of it. But on the flip side, I don't take myself too seriously. So, I kind of try and come at the source material with kind of a blend of, respect, but also carrying with me a sense of humor, just because I feel like it's really easy to kind of get lost, in honestly kind of like the darker side of paranormal research if you don't sort of throw back that trickster-esque aspect. So that's really glad to hear that it turned out that way. So thank you.
Absolutely.
It comes across as joyous. And I think we're all fans of John Keel, but when you read a lot of John Keel in a row, you start getting really paranoid.
Yes.
And
all
like
been
you
there.
don't want to look out the window at night. Like
John Keel Anonymous group, yeah.
Yeah.
like you start being really nervous when your phone rings, and like this, while being super informative and in-depth and has some really excellent theorization at the end, you know, does manage to keep from instilling an element of fear in the reader, which I think is awesome. I'm also sure some people are going to be like, well, it's not spooky enough. But like, this isn't necessarily about being spooky. This is about, you know, this is what happened. What can we learn?
That seriously just makes my day because, you know, bringing up Keel is a great point. You know, he is like, I love him. He's fantastic. I will admit, after reading The Eighth Tower, I mean, I was in my like mid to late teens. I had to take a break. I was like, this is too much. I'm not going to think about this for a couple weeks. Got to be done for now. And so I do totally understand what you're saying about that feeling of paranoia that, you know, comes across, because it's true, you know, he handled so many cases that he got so in depth and involved with. And you can really see how there was kind of that pull from the phenomenon in his life. And it's easy, just even with a casual interest, to start worrying about that in a way. So, you know, I'm seriously very glad to hear that, you know, my book comes across as, you know, not necessarily gloom and doom and like, you know, terrifying. Because, you know, after that little, you know, kind of miniature freak out session with The Eighth Tower, I really did try and like, you know, come at this from, I don't want to say more balanced, but kind of, yeah, just really looking at it still as seriously, but just not holding so tight to everything. And that's kind of how my work has progressed these past years. So again, just really, really glad to hear that it kind of turned out that way with this.
I also think that you caught just a taste of John Keel's lightheartedness when he's being funny, because he had a great sense of humor.
Oh, yes.
And so it is reminiscent of that sense of humor. There's a little taste of a Nick Redfern sardonicness in there, but you have a much lighter touch than either of them.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
with humor and you have your own voice. So I'm going to read this from your introduction because I loved this paragraph so much I highlighted it in hot pink. We're in the boondocks of the Twilight Zone, a place where half-formed concepts cavort with full-fledged nightmares. There are no clear boundaries here. Occurrences and appearances bleed through the tidy, self-contained categories that convention dictates should stand. Patterns exist between all anomalies, whether they be cryptid encounters, hauntings, UFO sightings, poltergeist phenomena, religious apparitions, folkloric beliefs, or demonic manifestations. The evidence at once points two separate ways: to physical occurrences that can't solely abide by physical laws, objective events that revel in subjective appearance. Simply put, the evidence points to something paradoxical. So you had me at that paragraph. I was like, well, if the rest of the book sucks, it's all right, because that paragraph's right there. But then the rest of the book follows in kind. And so I was really impressed with that, because you basically boiled it all down to it's neither this nor that, it's both. In every way you can look at it.
I'm going to say it again. Thank you.
Aw.
No, I'm seriously like, I almost feel like such a dork right now. I'm just like, I am beaming from ear to ear. So thank you so much. But yeah, that is kind of my current way of looking at all of this material. Is, you know, so often we're focused on, you know, is it physical or is it non-physical? I think that's one of the biggest questions in paranormal research, whether you're talking about UFOs and cryptids especially. Even once you get into ghosts and poltergeist manifestations, there's still that question. Even though, of course, we tend to really think of ghosts as immaterial, even though they can affect material change. And we think of UFOs and cryptids as material, even though they behave in ways that cannot possibly be solely material. And so I think that debate And it's a huge schism, too, between different researchers and different, people have their own kind of tents that they pitch in different camps. And I think that the trick is that we are looking for something that exists between those 2 points. And that's kind of a difficult thing to accept. I feel like as human beings, we really want to decide things. And we really like to, put them in this category, and then we're just done with it. That's why we have such a thing with taxonomy. We want to just call something a certain thing and just, it's over there now. We don't need to think about it. And so I think that concept of, existing at that kind of crossroads point, it is kind of a tricky thing to conceptualize even, but it's the only thing that really, in my mind at least, makes sense when you look at the full picture.
Exactly.
I also like, towards the end, there is theorizing in this book, and I'm trying not to spoiler everything, which is really hard.
We have to talk about it a little
bit.
We
have to talk about it a little bit.
Cool.
But I'm just it's such a good book. And I very rarely get to talk to an author of a book I really enjoy because a lot of them are dead.
Yeah.
It comes of being old.
I have had dreams about John Keel and H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know what to do with that.
I feel like we could have a seance, but even if John Keel showed up, you couldn't trust it to be John.
Exactly.
And he'd be salty anyway. He'd be
he would.
Why are you
bothering me? What are you doing?
How did you get my cosmic number?
Yeah, exactly.
Bugger off.
Yeah.
But I think that you say that there's room for multiple answers to be right. And I think that's such a valuable concept because it is so divided. Is it nuts and bolts? Is it flesh and blood? Is it, energy beings? Is it this? Is it that? And I tend to fall somewhere on the transmogrifications of energy side of things.
Oh,
but
yes.
I also am there might be physical Bigfoot somewhere. Is it all? Would it explain all Bigfoot cases? No, but it might explain a couple, but I don't know. And that I don't know, which you also talk about being of huge importance to researchers to just admit that none of us know.
Yeah.
Is so key because I think if we all just admit we don't know, I think we'll all feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good point.
We'll be less stressed out.
Yeah.
Trying to find the answer, but also I think admitting if you don't know something, it opens up more possibilities beyond what you've been thinking of things as, which was terrible syntax, but I hope everybody understood what I meant.
Oh, definitely. Well, and I think that's such a key point too. I'm open to any answer is the truth of it. However, I am not open to quote unquote the answer. As soon as that's what's being billed, I am truthfully no longer interested. And so I think that's the risk that we run too, because the concept, I am a huge fan too of the transmogrification of energy idea and Keel's super spectrum and all of that. My concern with that is kind of double-edged. My first concern is that if this phenomenon does have a reflective capability, it's just going to confirm that, just as it confirmed the nuts and bolts saucer motif, just as it confirmed the airships, just as it confirmed the fairies or religious apparitions or whatever. And then on the flip side, too, I do think, and Keel actually nailed this down at the end of Operation Trojan Horse, he was like, we don't want to lean too heavily on this concept that these things are not at all physical, because, and I think he said this kind of tongue-in-cheek, it leaves us wide open for an actual space alien invasion. But that is, kind of a coy way of putting it. I do think that, like you were saying, and like I firmly, kind of have my foot in too, I think that there's definitely more than one right answer with all of this. And Bigfoot is another fantastic example of that. Whether it's nostalgia, Bigfoot was my first big interest in the paranormal, or what, I would really love there to be physical Bigfoots. I am very nostalgic for that concept that somewhere in North America, there's a population of actual undiscovered primates. And I think that there's the possibility for that. I mean, there really isn't anything to discourage the idea that they could exist in small numbers. Now, do I believe that that accounts for the majority of sightings across the entire country? Not at all. Do I think it accounts for the sightings of Bigfoot with light anomalies, Bigfoot holding onto orbs, Bigfoot vanishing? Absolutely not. I think that, in this case, and that's a perfect example of that, we're looking at two different types of phenomena, one that may actually be natural as we understand it and organic as we understand it, and then one that is whatever else this actually is.
Right. Yeah, when I read about Bigfoot being seen in a London sort of industrial area near a railroad track, with some shrubbery, some weedy shrubs, that was all that the rest of it was warehouses. I was like, there is no way that there is a relict population of hominids covered in fur living in London. I'm sorry, it can't.
Yes.
But in the Pacific Northwest, yes, it can. I thoroughly believe that they can be physical in some cases and then paraphysical in other cases, because then you still have footprints.
Yeah. Oh,
but they disappear in the middle of a field of snow. Well, how does that happen?
Exactly.
Maybe he, I don't know, hitched a ride with a UFO. It's not like that's never been seen. So, what do you do with that? Those bits of information. And as you say, humans don't like both and. We don't like this and that. We like this or that. We like assurances. But, Wired just came out with this big article about the life and work of Jacques Vallée, and he's been in this 60 years and he still doesn't know what UFOs are, and he says it right there. Says it openly. I've been doing this for 60 years. I have no idea what they are. So if he's comfortable saying, I have no idea what they are, I don't know. I'm going to go on his side and be like, none of us know what they are. And whenever somebody is like, I know exactly what it is, I'm like, okay. Okay. Belief's the enemy. I'm just going to go over here now and be quiet and smile and nod politely and be kind, because that's what I'm going to do. But you really do very well with you have all of these cases where there's physical evidence, and then then that they dissolve into thin air and become spooks or specters. It's fascinating. I just love it. And you have lots and lots and lots of the high strangeness for those of us who truly enjoy high strangeness.
How did you pick your cases? Standard boilerplate question. Sorry.
Hey, no, that's
fine.
But
I wondered it as I was reading it. I was like, there's so many that you can dig through, and somehow you managed to get that 1970s compilation album of the greatest hits. So how did you do that?
I love that analogy, by the way. So thank you, because as maybe obvious from my work, I love that era in particular of the late 60s, early 70s. I love that in general, but especially when it comes to high strangeness, it's just it really is the golden age, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
So how do I pick my cases? That is a great question, because I kind of I read a lot of this stuff just constantly. So I've got a lot of information coming in, and pretty much it's just, I feel kind of almost like a crow when it sees a shiny thing. There'll just be a case that just stands out, and I'm like, that seems weird. And the weirder it is, the weirder it seems right off the bat, the more likely I am to pick it up and try and find everything I possibly can on it. So really it comes right down to the fact I am a huge fan of high strangeness, of course. So I really love cases that have, for one thing, high contact, or, a pretty lengthy period of time where the witnesses are engaging with the phenomenon. It's one of the first things I look out for, because that usually yields more high strangeness and more weird stuff. Yeah. So, once I've kind of picked up on a case that I think is really intriguing, Like a great example of this is actually the Marlinton Encounter. I first came across that in Keel's The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, and he just had a short snippet on this Sasquatch-like creature that shorted out a guy's car twice. And so once I kind of pick up on a case where I'm like, okay, this one ticks all the boxes, I want to find out what I can about it, then I go on a hunt for anything I can possibly find. So like, articles, any mentions in other books, if there's even websites that have the story, if they have different sources. Marlinton is a perfect example, too, of how I found a ton of old newspaper articles about it, which when I can find newspaper articles from the, date this occurred, I'm just thrilled about that. Because for one thing, you're close to the actual event's time, which is always important because, it's a really close, not necessarily firsthand, but as close as you can firsthand account. And then two, I just love these retro newspapers, and Marlinton is such a great example of this because they just, honestly, they are so interesting, and the vernacular that they use to discuss these monsters is just fantastic. The Marlinton Encounter occurred, at this time where there was kind of this mild monster panic going on in the area. And so the newspapers were running articles on this Sasquatch-like creature that people were seeing. However, they were correlating it to the Braxton County monster, which had occurred almost a decade earlier. So seeing that tie in the newspapers, they actually even in one said, perhaps the Braxton monster is back, but it seems to have changed its face. Just hearing the way that they talk about and discuss these cases is so much fun. So anyway, I'm like way off the beaten path here. So I go around, I try and find absolutely every source I can on these cases. And then once I have my collection of information, I really try and like filter down and see what the actual narrative is. Because a lot of the times when you're dealing with these old cases, they've been reprinted many times, and sometimes there'll be, artifacts added in, sometimes, certain accounts will leave something out. So really trying to figure out, okay, what actually did happen? And setting down that narrative is my first concern. And so then once I have the strong, facts of the case, that's when I kind of get to do my absolute favorite thing in the world, and that is just absolutely pick it apart and dissect it and look for different patterns and, parallels with other cases and speculate on it. So that's kind of my process for choosing cases and then how I deal with them.
So when you dissect a case, what do you, I'm seeing you dressed up as Scully in the morgue with the
pretty.
Yeah,
I do have a lab coat and some gloves. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. I'm rewatching the X-Files with my younger child, so I Scully and Mulder are very close in my head now.
Oh my
but
gosh.
what I know it's so fun to watch it with somebody who's never seen it.
One of my favorite shows of all time. I'm sure that's probably pretty obvious.
Yeah. It is.
I have no shame.
And so what do? Do you do like a folklorist does and pull out story motifs, essentially, where okay, this was a saucer-shaped object. That's one motif. It's silver. It's another motif. There was spontaneous psychokinesis afterwards. That's another one. Is that part of how you do it, or how do you go about that?
That is actually really close to what I do. And the funny thing is, writing this book was it was a journey, but it was also kind of a trip, if that makes sense, because I got to revisit a lot of cases that I did, years ago for my channel. And it's interesting because I can see just in that fairly short span of time, how my thought process and all of these has kind of evolved. And not only that, but my information base has also evolved. And so it was super fun to be able to go back and look at some of those cases that I did years ago and realize I didn't pick out everything I possibly could have. So yeah, I do. I just kind of look for, certain motifs that stick out or symbols, especially to certain aspects of the story that you'll see time and time again. Of course, there are a few that I'm really interested in, such as like light anomalies, strange noises, things like that. And those are some that, it's amazing, but it's like when I go back again to those earlier cases that I reviewed for my videos, I didn't see that pattern at that point in time. And so it was so much fun to then kind of like look at those cases over again, and tie them into this larger, again, kind of like database of cases and high strangeness. So yeah, it's pulling out aspects and, especially patterns that I've seen before. So many of these cases share patterns between each other. And that is just every time I can find something that correlates to another case, especially if it's like a cross-boundary case. You know, if I'm dealing with one UFO case and there's another Bigfoot case and they share a similar motif, that is just so exciting to me. So yeah, that's exactly what I do. Pull out all of the different things that remind me of other things and then just kind of delineate them from there.
That sounds awesome.
I had a weird brain segue. Sorry, everybody. One thing I noticed that's sort of a pattern. It's not in every case, but it's in just under half of them. And I loved this, and I loved that you noted this. People, when the strange experience starts happening, they do not initially go, oh, it's obviously a strange thing. They go, oh, it's a raccoon.
Yes.
Or some normal thing.
Mhm.
That is the first assumption people make, is that this is a mundane thing that's happening. And then they get a closer look, and then they're like, okay, this is not normal. And they fully experience the strange that is going on. And I love that for two reasons. One, I think it sort of puts to rest this idea that floats around in skeptics' corners of the world where, oh, people just jump to magical conclusions. It's like, no, people jump to mundane conclusions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love that I love that you just included that, because it is part of a pattern. And I have not seen that pattern laid out in a book as just part of the similarities of cases ever before. And you are that careful of a researcher and narrator that that little thing is there to be picked up on in your case selection.
Well, again, thank you. I'm so sorry. Probably just 500,000 thank yous left for this episode. So anyways.
We could stop praising you, but like, we had you on your show to talk about your book, and it's just going to happen, I think.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Sorry.
But that's all right. I swear I'm blushing. Anyway. No, and I appreciate that you brought that up too, because that is, and again, it stands out to me for the first reason that you brought up as well. So often you'll hear from skeptics, oh, well, people just want to see Bigfoot. They want to see a UFO. They want to see something insane and crazy and out there. They want to have that experience. So when they actually saw a sandhill crane, they called it Mothman. And it frustrates me to no end because, you know, like you just said, in so many of these cases, it's true. The witnesses immediately justify it as something normal going on. Mm-hmm. You know, they rationalize it as something that they've experienced before. And, you know, even it got to the point, like, one of my favorite examples of this is actually the Rochdale creature, which, of course, was from Rochdale, Indiana. It had spectral qualities, almost like a poltergeist, even though it looked like a Bigfoot. And the family initially was insistent that it was just an escaped gorilla. You know, it had visited their house several times by this point. They're like, that is a gorilla. You know, finally, I think after it did its magical vanishing act and appeared translucent and didn't leave tracks, they started realizing this was obviously a very magical gorilla. But no, people really, when they have these experiences, their knee-jerk reaction is to make it something that they understand. You know, I see that when I go through these cases, and I think, too, it also helps. I've seen it in the personal experiences that I've had or that family members have had. You know, when you see something insane, you're not going to immediately jump to some crazy, like, out-of-this-world explanation. You're going to try and see if it's something normal first.
That is what I do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I know when my mom saw, when we had this really close sighting of orbs, I think I may have talked about it on the last episode I was on with you guys. You know, when she first saw them, she was like, wow, there's a construction site over there. That's a big crane. And then she's like, there's no crane. Those are just lights. You know, so it's like, you really, you know, you try and fit things into reality. And then you come to the terrifying conclusion for many of these people that it simply doesn't fit. So yeah, that is why that's such an important aspect to me too, because, you know, so often I think that, and here's the thing, true skepticism where you really try and look at the evidence and try and understand it, I have no problem with that. Dogmatic skepticism, I have a major problem with. And my biggest problem with it too is that, you know, people who really just kind of believe in disbelief try to appear so rational about it. And it's that rationalization, and well, this couldn't possibly have been, something, a UFO sighting, or it could have possibly been a Bigfoot because it was obviously just an owl, or it was obviously just, reflections, or it was obviously just a star or something. It sounds so practical and it sounds so rational, and people who don't really have an interest in this sort of thing are likely going to be like, okay, yeah, look at the crazy people who said that their house was besieged by aliens. It was just, what was the example for the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins? Oh, it was circus monkeys painted silver from one of those many crashed circus trains.
That
but really,
happen all the time.
And
I know.
your monkeys silver.
And they can float, and they're bulletproof. Don't forget that one.
And they were drinking, which apparently they weren't, because alcohol wasn't allowed in the house.
And also, too, a whole posse of investigators was on the scene in the middle of that night. They found no evidence of alcohol on the premises. Not to mention that the entire family piled into the car, made their way to the police station, and didn't appear drunk at all. They just appeared frightened. So that's my other kind of, the flip side of my issue with that concept, is that the rational option, the mundane option that is so often kind of paraded around, usually doesn't fit the evidence in the slightest, making it then kind of oxymoronic. It's completely impractical. So there's my rant.
Yeah.
It was a good one.
It's an excellent one, and it's one that needs to be repeated. My problem with dogmatic skepticism is it's another case of belief is the enemy.
Exactly.
It's just kind of in the opposite way. That's not scientific reasoning. Scientific reasoning is looking at the evidence in an unbiased way, and you go through all of the possibilities, and when you go through all of the probable possibilities and you're left with the improbable, then that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
That's how even Sherlock Holmes knew that, for goodness sake.
Yes.
I mean,
one of my other idols of my childhood.
Mother Conan Doyle was interested in spiritualism. He was clearly biased.
Yes. But still, Sherlock Holmes knew that.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hardly ever anything spiritual for good old Sherlock.
It
was
true.
almost always something that those darn kids did.
I was obsessed with Sherlock Holmes when I was a kid. Read through all of the original.
Was I.
Yeah.
Same.
Oh my gosh.
Were you also obsessed with Agatha Christie?
Actually, no. Somehow I missed out on that one. I was also
Agatha
obsessed
Christie's great.
I was also obsessed with Harry Houdini, though, which is kind of ironic, given Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini.
I think that's a good balance.
That is
honestly.
a good balance.
You get both sides of good, yes, spiritualism, nay, spiritualism.
I mean, I'm a Pisces. What can I say?
That makes sense, yeah.
And I only halfway believe in astrology.
I was about to say, I'm not super big on astrology, but I do like the symbolism of the duality.
Yeah.
So when you look at your patterns, what do you think is the do you have one pattern that seems to be the most important one, most prevalent one? That's what I mean. That there's one thing that is mostly prevalent in all of these high strangeness cases. Although you do have characters in this book. You've got some frogmen and some demons and horrors and monsters. I mean, you have a whole cast of unsavories in there, but they don't seem too terribly scary the way you write about them, so that's appreciated.
Frogmen and demons and monsters, oh my.
Exactly.
Maybe, yeah, that should have been the title. Anyway. So I think that for me, initially as I started this book, and it's amazing to kind of see, this is a growing process for me as I go through my research. Because when I started the book, I thought that the one that I would be most really kind of trying to pin down was especially light anomalies. And I do spend a lot of time on that concept. By the time I reached the end of the book, I'm tending to look at that in conjunction with the concept that there appears to almost be like a kind of a primer in these cases. That when people have these cases of high contact, it starts usually with a more vague event. And I think that that's really important because, again, a lot of the times it's a light anomaly. There are many of these cases where a light or even almost a light emission from the entity is the first thing noticed. And again, that was what was really standing out to me as I was going through this. But then there's many other cases too where actually there's a strange noise, that is the first event. And I know Joshua Cutchin in Brimstone Deceit even talked about the concept of these bizarre smells associated with paranormal. So it seems to me that's something that I'm definitely kind of on high alert for now, is any sort of event that precedes what we consider the main event. Because of course, when we're dealing with these cases, and again, I focus on cases of high contact. And so usually there's one really big weird thing, whether it's an entity or a UFO event, or maybe entities with a UFO event. And that's kind of the focus. However, right before that, the smaller, more vague event, like Rochdale is another great example, where, there were sightings of this Bigfoot-like creature that appeared almost spectral over a couple of weeks. Dozens of people saw it in the town. It even was held responsible for the killing of over 100 chickens. So you have this really crazy monster event, again, high contact over a large period of time, lots of witnesses. However, the initial event was of an exploding light anomaly. And strangely enough, it was spotted by the key witness's brother. And then later that day, the key witness herself heard a strange noise. She and her son went outside to close the windows on the family car because it was just starting to rain. And she said that she heard a boo or ooh type noise. She looked around, no one was there. She heard it again. And it was at that point that she thought that it sounded human. And she even felt kind of a breath on the back of her neck, looked behind her, no one was there. So again, that is like kind of the small, you'd think it's almost like small potatoes, oh, you heard a weird disembodied voice, there was an exploding light anomaly. Let's look at the Bigfoot, and the vast murder of hundreds of chickens. Let's look at how it doesn't leave footprints and how weird this is. But I think that those, again, more vague, kind of smaller events, I think that it's definitely a mistake not to think that they're important. And this, of course, too, it goes back to Keel in Operation Trojan Horse, where he discussed hard sightings versus softer sightings. And I mean, this was mainly with UFOs. And he said, we're so focused on the hard sightings of the craft. How big was it? What color was it? Did it have propellers? How high was it? How fast was it going? And we tend to ignore the softer sightings of simply light anomalies. And so I think that, focusing on either one too much is obviously kind of dangerous. You're really running the risk of missing something. But yeah, that's probably the biggest pattern that's emerged, just even through the writing of this book, is that a lot of these events are preceded by something which seemingly is less important and is definitely a lot more vague. So that's something I'm keeping an eye out as I go through cases now.
Yeah. Keel even said in his newsletter that he, mimeographed and sent out back in the day for investigators to ask witnesses about something. Did anything strange happen before this happened? Like a few weeks before, or a few days before, or a month before? Does anyone in your house have precognitive dreams, or, things like that? Did you hear something? He kind of was in there that there was almost always a little thing that happens. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people I've been interviewing who are experiencers don't consider themselves experiencers until they start talking about all the experiences they've had. And, if you take them each one by one, they're small. Mm-hmm. But if you string them together, boy, that sounds awful experiency to me, that's a lot of stuff. And yes, it was stretched out over a lifetime, but that's still considerable, considering that people think, hey, these things are abnormal. Mm-hmm. These never happen.
Oh, yeah. And, it's funny how that works because, and I think, again, forgive me if this is a rewind. I think we may have touched on this last time. But I know I never really considered personal experiences that I've had, or even that my family has had, as having anything to do with my interest in this. And it wasn't until someone actually did ask me, they're like, well, hey, you should write down everything that's happened to you. And I start writing it, over the course of a lifetime and realizing there's a pattern I missed in my own life, And so that is, it's eye-opening. And it's intriguing because it's true. I do feel like, and this is right in line with the concept that we try to rationalize stuff away. I think that for the most part, when people have even a big event, they're almost so lost in that and lost in, okay, this one thing happened, that they forget about the dozen of other things that happened. So yeah, that's a fantastic point.
Okay, can I ask about a specific case?
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
Okay, what's up with Creepy Clown Sam?
Yeah, I knew you'd hate that one.
I don't hate it. I
just didn't like it.
He comes from under a bridge. So we've got troll motif worked in here. There's berry picking motif in there, which is like both fairies and missing 411
and Bigfoot.
And Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And that is like, to me, one of the most high strangeness cases in this book.
Yes, that one kind of takes the cake.
Like,
in my opinion.
Wins.
Yeah, it does win the book. It does.
Thank you. And to quote my younger sister, who laughs at the clown? I think that there is something, especially now where we are with pop culture, where clowns, they have a certain creep factor. And so this one, I mean, the intriguing thing to me is that the argument is that, this thing, whatever it was, appeared as a clown to try and seem friendly. And I'm like, man, I would have been running so fast.
Yeah, I would have run.
There's clown symbolism. Like, clowning is an ancient tradition that is not really that cheerful.
No.
Yeah, there's a lot of... Yeah.
There's a lot of death in there.
Yeah. Layers and layers kind of wrapped up in that one. And I know that one, too. The berry picking stood out to me as well. I mean, this case is it's very bizarre. It's also bizarre because the main witness was a 7-year-old girl, and the pseudonym that the investigators chose for her was Faye Y.
I know.
Which I'm like, either someone was having a really great pun of high strangeness, or that was absolutely coincidental. Either way, very intriguing use of a pseudonym there. And yeah, she and a boy about her same age heard, again, we're talking about these priming type experiences, this strange wailing noise. Wailing noises come up in tons of other encounters, whether it's Bigfoot, even some UFO cases. Of course, haunted houses are pretty much synonymous with that noise. And they followed it across a meadow when it just stopped. As they were crossing this little footbridge, a blue-gloved hand popped out, and then it was followed by this 7-foot-tall, for lack of a better term, kind of like clown automaton. They said that it had an almost kind of jester-style type outfit, which appeared all tattered. It was wearing a hood, but it also had wooden antennae and a black knob, and also a totally flat face that I guess did not move, even though it spoke to them. And
now just let's pause here.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah,
there is so much. Just that's straight up Doctor Who villain. That is straight up Doctor Who monster.
Yeah,
I was like,
that's a good point.
I swear, Russell T Davies made that critter up. He's one of his tulpas. He made him up, and then he was like, I'm not going to use the script, and he threw it away, and it became this guy. It's just creepy.
Yes.
Horrible. And I was seeing it as a Doctor Who episode in my head, and I was like, oh, man, no.
Or grown-up Pinocchio who never got turned into a real boy.
Yeah. Either one of these options is fairly horrifying.
Yes, you may go on now, but I seriously had the Doctor Who vibe coming off that thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, because, it's the idea that it seemed, you think of like, okay, the concept of the clown or the jester, that figure is very old. It winds its way through folklore. And so it's tempting to say that you have this really kind of, older, more traditional feeling entity. But then the details, the flat face, the unmoving lips, the fact that it had geometric shapes instead of facial features, even the antennae, even though they were made out of wood, that conjures up, something almost like a mockery of technology.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is this weird thing that's hearkening to both, in a sense, the past with the folkloric motifs and the future with the technological motifs. And then the rest of it is just 100% weird. Not only did it use several different communication styles, such as at one point a microphone, which I know, and it's amazing seeing these cases too, because of course, in the British UFO Research Association journal, which this case is sourced from, they actually started out by saying Ghost or Spaceman 73, which I think is just a hilarious intro to this thing. That you only have two options, Ghost or Spaceman. But anyway. No, but, it's if you handle it in the technological sense, you see this motif of the communication device, the microphone, across other UFO encounters. The interesting thing in this case, though, is that when it spoke into the microphone, the voice appeared right next to the children. And then later on, when they were just talking to it, they said that its face didn't move, but again, the voice was right next to them. And to me, that conjures up a lot of apparitional type reports where people say that they'll see a ghost. And, let's say it's the ghost of a murdered bride or something. And they hear this woman's voice talking to them, usually in their ear, while the face is not moving. So again, you have this thing which, it's tempting to say, oh, well, it's, it appears to fit in with like the UFO type motif, but then it pulls this very spectral means of communication. In addition to those two types of communication, it also had this book that it wrote down a jumble of words and actually had the girl repeat back in a certain order to say that it was, hello, and I am Sam of all colors. I mean, this case is really probably the trippiest one in my book, and there are really some trippy cases on here. Yeah.
That was one of the ones I hadn't heard of, and I was like, man, I'm glad I didn't hear about that when I was a kid, because I wouldn't have slept.
It's almost like a wooden golem, like particularly with the writing and reading of words and the face not moving.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because you have to read the words in a certain order to animate the golem, and then you read them backwards to stop it.
Yeah,
I thought about that.
It had to read the words "I am Sam, hello."
Yeah.
So,
that's a good point. Jeez. Yeah, this case, and then too, it's just weird because it pulls at so many different directions.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of these cases too that's so close to falling into so many patterns, and then it just veers right off track. Because even the weird thing, when it was first seen, it was holding onto a book. It dropped the book in the water. It had to go back to its metallic hut to get something to fish the book out of the water. Again, there's a lot. I mean, even Betty and Barney Hill, the infamous book that she wanted to reclaim from her encounter, that falls kind of in with some UFO reports. But then a lot of its conversation, once it took the children to its metallic hut, which is the creepiest aspect of the case for me, simply because, and again, this case, you can look at it from so many angles. The kids went, so I'm like bouncing all over the place. When the kids were done with this encounter, they came to the decision that it was either a ghost or someone in a costume. And now when I pull the someone in a costume thing, I'm going to go right here on the record and say that is a million times scarier to me than a clown automaton or ghost or spaceman or whatever.
Yep.
On the
That's why I
flip
didn't
side,
like it.
Exactly. On the flip side, though, the reason that I do tend to think that this was something truly anomalous is because the main witness's father, for years, had encounters with light anomalies. And the intriguing thing is that it seemed as though they were almost building. It started many years prior to her encounter with Sandown Sam, where he would see these, just simply kind of balls of light. They even appeared to follow him. He claimed that he was able to kind of almost have a communication with them. One of my favorite parts, he said one time he was so bored of watching them that he just went into his buddy's house. When he came out, they were still there. And so over the years, he said that they kind of increased, in how many times he would see them, until finally he had an encounter where he saw these two large points of light out in the ocean, and he said that they looked like large eyes. Now, this apparently was his last encounter before his daughter had this incredibly high contact encounter. So again, the kids said, hey, maybe it's a guy in a costume. To me, it seems to fall into line with, familial type anomaly. But no, once they were in this metallic hut, which to me really reminds me of a lot of cases of the fairy faith, where children especially are taken into the fairies' hall, and from the outside it appears to be very small, or maybe it's just an opening in a rock or something. And then once you're inside, it's this glorious palace. Well, Sam's palace was a little bit, maybe not up to snuff. I guess it was 2-story, and one of them was really metallic with kind of dials on the walls, whereas the other one was very homey with a wooden stove and furniture. But once they were in this location, the conversation that he had with them, to me, harkens a lot to the fairy faith. Especially when he was delineating how there were others like him on the mainland. He said he could only gather berries at a certain time of day, and that he had to clean the river water before he drank it. And again, that conjures up so many cases of the fairy faith, especially the berry thing, which is such a weird detail. And you're right, it comes up in Missing 411, Bigfoot encounters. I just came across another Bigfoot encounter from like the early 1900s, where apparently this cloud and a monster came upon these people berry picking. It's constant. But the intriguing thing about this in particular is that there are actual rules as to when to avoid berry patches, because at certain times, that was when the good folk were there. And then you have this bizarre clown automaton thing saying, hey, from 4 to 5, I'm at that berry patch. It's just so weird. And so, again, these patterns and these details, if you're saying, okay, well, the kids just made it up for, God knows what reason, as to how exactly they would be able to nail down all these really fine folkloric details while also maintaining such a high degree of nonsense, that is beyond me.
Yeah. And it doesn't sound like a kid's story.
No.
He would have been more cheerful and would have played with them and sung songs. Because I've heard, stories that my younger cousins made up and stuff. And, it always had, whenever they said, oh, I saw a little gnome and we sang songs and we gave him a cupcake and he gave us, it's none of this metal hut with dials on the walls and a book you have to read out and, knobs on. No, none of that.
There's no strong narrative.
Exactly.
Again, I feel like
and kids have a narrative.
Yes,
because they're playing.
They've got something. Yeah, they have a thing that they are trying to accomplish, a story or whatever. And usually it's pretty much point A to point B. Now they might mix up a few details. Forgive them. I mean, they're children. But like with this, it's a very strong meandering narrative that ends up going nowhere and has a million dead ends. And I think, too, one of the things that really goes against the concept that it was just some fantasy is the fact that as soon as they left the thing, which this is another really weird example, this is one case where the phenomenon didn't end the encounter. The kids actually said, okay, it's time for us to leave. And so they left, which I think is really amazing because I would say most of the time, either the witness decide to run away or the phenomenon is what calls it quits. It just is not there anymore. And in this case, they were just, okay, we got stuff to do. And the very first thing they did was try to alert a workman to what had just happened. And he had been working nearby the entire length of the encounter and claimed that he didn't see anything. So, again, that's their first kind of prerogative is, okay, we're going to tell this guy. And, he didn't see anything the entire length of time that this encounter was going on. Which, I mean, that in and of itself is kind of, it points to something that he didn't notice anything weird going on. And again, that kind of, the concept that maybe it was some guy in a costume, he would have noticed that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and he also, it's not like he noticed the kids playing by themselves either. Like, he didn't notice anything. So where did the kids go?
Exactly. And this is pure speculation. But the truth of the matter is, where were they if he didn't notice anything? And I think that, that probably is one of the freakiest parts of this story. And the truth is, I really, I've been so interested in this for so long that not much really scares me anymore with the paranormal. One thing that does is the concept of like the missing 411 disappearances. And, the fact that throughout the paranormal, especially older encounters, you see that concept come up a lot. And so in this case in particular, I really do wonder what would have happened if they didn't, at the end of their half hour say, okay, Sam, see you around.
Yeah. Would they have gotten changelinged?
Exactly.
And that poor workman might have been blamed for it.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah, very good point.
Or would Sam have dropped down into sticks and moss because he was a fairy puppet that they'd animated for only a certain length of time or something even weirder?
Yeah, appearing under the bridge too. I mean, that is such a, talk about symbolism. Not only is there tons of folkloric symbolism, I know I brought up in the book The Billy Goat's Gruff, where the troll is under the bridge, but even the concept that, fairies were heavily associated with bridges. Pretty much throw a brick at any paranormal entity. I mean, don't do that, it'll probably get mad at you, but most of them at some point or another have been associated with bridges and crossing points. And so even that is just, I mean... There's
a whole thing about can they cross water? No, yes.
Yeah.
Only if it's a bridge of a certain type. Yes. Yeah, there's all these traditions. And I was checking those off as I was reading it going, oh no, Oh, I don't like this. No, no, no. Oh, you can only pick the berries at a certain time. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, okay. I did not like it. Not at all.
Oh yeah. One of the few bright points in this is the fact that when they first saw him, I guess, they had zero interest in this guy. They saw this 7-foot-tall clown automaton come out from under the bridge, and they just kept wandering around. They were like, okay, whatever. They weren't afraid of him. They weren't interested. They were just like, okay. And then it was only when the wailing noise started up and he brought out his microphone. You know, maybe they thought there was karaoke. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe he invented it.
I kind of like admire two kids who are just like, all right, whatever, 7-foot-tall thing. We're just going to do our thing.
Over here. You know.
I know.
Like, I would not have been that nonplussed. I would have been like, bro, what are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and their conversation, the funniest thing too is that the part of the story that sounds exactly like kids is their conversation. The first thing they ask the guy is, hey man, why is your clothing all torn up? What's up with
that's
that?
Such a kid thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, because
that
they're
was-
still young enough to not really have great manners.
Yeah,
You know, because that's
exactly.
the kind of thing that they would say, and their mom would, you know, smack them in the back.
You
of the
don't
neck
ask
and,
that.
You don't. I'm so sorry. You know, because yeah, I remember at 6 and 7, I was still apt to blurt stupid things out
yeah.
like that. You know, and
I had
that,
no tact at that age either.
Nobody does. Nobody does. You always say what's on your mind.
I
and it's
barely
usually
have tact now.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
it was so true to life, though, in that sense that I was just like, this is so wild. It reminded me of one of my other favorite British cases, which is the little gnomes in the little cars and Nottinghamshire, you know, driving around in the park. I love that one, except that one's much less creepy because
Yes.
they just sort of drove around and were kind of cute. They were a little bit weird looking in the face, but they didn't like take kids into a hut and all that.
I have been circling that particular case for a long time. It's probably going to make an appearance on my channel in the near future. Because I know that one too, it's like, it sounds so charming in a way. You know, just imagining these little things just kind of tootling around. Yeah, definitely not as creepy as Sandown Sam.
I'm pretty sure nothing's that creepy. It really bugged me.
Yeah.
I both love that case because it is so strange. And it has all, like we've discussed, it has all these threads. But like, of all of the things that, the cases that I read in this book, that is the one that if it happened to me, I would be the most freaked out for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be having nightmares about him.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, it's true. Just imagining that flat, it's almost like, you know, if you see the illustrations in some of the old journals, it's almost like a paper plate with just like a few shapes thrown on for the face. And I'm like, yeah, you really can't get a grip on that. You can't get a
No.
read on that thing. You know, it's just, it's kind of there and you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that.
Yeah. 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 Again, like I said, it's straight up Doctor Who. See, now I'm all like thinking about that creepy dude. He was so creepy. What kind of things did you basically, what are your favorite bits of High Strangeness? Do you have like favorite oddities, like motifs or threads that you just love to see that jump out?
Oh boy, that's a difficult question. Let me think. I mean, light anomalies, I will say a million times over, I am very interested in those. And
Yeah.
part of that is, you know, due to personal experiences. The other part of that is just due to the fact that it seems as though they're very prevalent. And I think that, you know, in a way, they may provide probably one of the clues as to what this is. Again, not really sure if we'll ever accomplish that. But I think that if we're really trying to sift through and find the truth, you know, the fact that light is present in so many of these cases and it takes such, you know, a kind of key role in many of them. And in a way almost envelops a lot of these high contact cases. That definitely is something that I really look out for. But then there are like way more obscure things. Like, honestly, if there is ever mention of berries, I go totally bananas. I'm like, okay, holy smokes, it's berries. It's
berries again. There they are.
I do the same thing. I do the same thing with berry pecking and livestock deaths.
Yes.
I'm like, yes! And then like I feel really bad because that's somebody's like animals.
Yeah, I have a moment where I'm like, yay, but not, but yay.
Yeah.
But those poor things. Yeah. Also, running water is another one that I'm pretty much just naming off all of the threads at this point. Whenever I find a pattern, I'm a total pattern freak. I'm like, hey, there it is. Because running water, and especially the crossing of running water, is another thing that I have a major interest in, just because that's one of those rules that doesn't always apply. So often you'll have, you'll say, okay, well, entities can't cross running water. That's a belief in a lot of different cultures about a lot of different entities. And then, just as many times they can, or just as many times they're intrinsically tied to running water. Mm-hmm. And so that, that double-edged rule to me, again, I have a major interest in that. And I wonder, what exactly decides why in some cases you do see that the phenomena seems to cease at water, whereas other times it has no effect, and other times it's exclusively tied to it. It's absolutely befuddling. So that's another one that I'm really intrigued by. And then, oh gosh, there was one other one where I'm like, I always keep an eye out for that. Oh, it'll come back to me in a second. But yeah, no, light anomalies. I mean, that's, again, if I can
that's my big one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But there was one other. I'm going to be driving myself nuts with this.
You'll remember it 3 in the morning.
Exactly.
Spontaneous psychokinesis.
That is also something that I do look out for, but that was not what it is. Oh well, it'll come back to me. I mean, I think that one of the things, not necessarily high strangeness, but the thing that I'm really intrigued by is when you can look at like the witness response to these things. I mean, that, again, it's not necessarily confined to high strangeness, but just seeing how different people react to something totally outlandish. That's another thing that I absolutely love to see. And in some cases, it's actually really quite sad, such as the Cisco Grove encounter. The main witness in that actually had PTSD from his event. He ended up having recurring nightmares about his event. Whenever he heard owls, which is a really, really weird detail, he would panic. So, in some cases, it's really tragic. In others, it's kind of just not quite so tragic, but still sad, such as the Simonton encounter, one of my all-time favorite cases, of course, better known as the alien pancakes. Right. You have this man who was an upstanding member of his community. He was liked by a lot of people, respected by a lot of people. And by the time the media frenzy had died down, he said that if anything else happened, he would not report it. And I guess many years later, an investigator did go and talk to him. And all he would say is that he had had other encounters and he wasn't going to talk about it. So,
so
there's kind of the bummer.
That.
Exactly. So there's the kind of bummer response. But then you have one of my personal favorites, which is what WC, or Doc Priestley, responded to his sighting of the car frying Bigfoot. He decided not to tell his friends about it for months because he didn't want to scare them away. He wanted to go back to the area to do some deer hunting later in the season. And so he kept his encounter a secret until deer hunting season was over. So it's I love seeing people's responses to coming to terms with the paranormal. And especially, good old Doc Priestley. The poor man had his car burn out and he still was such a trooper. He's like, I'm not telling anyone. We're coming back here to do deer hunting. I'm gonna scare those guys away.
Priorities in order, man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was a good place for deer hunting, man. You can't miss out on that.
Meanwhile, the locals are organizing posses with guns and muskets, and Doc Priestley is just like, I'll tell my encounter when the time is right.
Yes. I know my friends are chicken shit. I'm not going to say.
Oh, and just like that, I remember the thread. Facelessness. Oh, that is another one of my personal pet faves. Yeah, I have no idea what reminded me of that. But anyway, Faceless Entities, that is another just special interest of mine. Just because, again, it's something you see across the board. So it'll be spectral encounters, UFO encounters, cryptids. You have these things that have either obscured faces or no faces, which is already weird enough. But then the thing that really cemented that, my last presentation at the Van Meter Visitor Festival was on the issue of UFO occupant clothing. And of course, I kind of branched out from UFO occupants and included other stuff as well. And I did a particular slide on the issue of facelessness. And of course, I was gathering all of these illustrations, and so I was like, okay, this will be cool. I've got Momo, the Missouri Monster. I've got a Banshee. I've got a classic, like, Faceless Nun, and then I've got this particular UFO occupant encounter. And so, of course, I'm putting the slides together, and I go back to it, like, hours later. And it was one of those just weird moments where I was like, this is the same thing. Each of these is, like, the same exact silhouette. It's the same posturing, and it's the same vibe. It's just that, you know, in this one, it was seen outside, so it's Bigfoot. In this one, it was seen in this haunted location, so it's, of course, a ghostly nun. In this one, it was seen with a UFO, so, of course, it's some sort of extraterrestrial. So, yeah, facelessness is another thing that I always, if I can find a case that details some faceless being, that has made my day.
Yeah. And, like, I love your theorization around facelessness as well. Because, you know, I have nightmares about faceless things.
Oh, same.
I think a lot of people
everybody
do.
does.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that isn't pulled out of our heads, or if you're right and it's just faceless beings aren't done materializing yet. Or if perhaps the people who see them don't have a strong enough belief structure for the thing to reach into our heads and pull a mask out.
Yeah, that's something I've wondered as well, because, you know, the weirdest thing about faceless entities is the fact that I feel like this is finally the dead giveaway that we're not looking at what we think we're looking at. You know, because if you're looking at some sort of strange being, and I'm going to use just, like, you know, cryptids as an example. You know, again, if you look at cryptozoology in the classical sense, it's just some undiscovered animal. It has to, in some degree, function as we would expect it to function. And I know that life can take many forms. I think that that's a very valid point. However, when you're dealing with something which has no face and is still behaving like it does have one, like the Spectre of Winterfold, that is a great case because it's this really vague, you know, you can't even really decide exactly what it is. You know, I think that it's funny because a lot of these entities that kind of are undecided, they just get lopped in with UFO occupants. Like that was kind of a catch-all in that golden age. Even if there was no UFO nearby, it was just kind of like, okay, we'll take it. It seems alien enough. And this is one of those. It was this bizarre bell-shaped object with kind of just this white space where its face would be. It even had like a strange rigid white arm. And these two motorists had pulled over to wipe their car windows off. Or, you know, a motorist and his passenger. And this thing, quote unquote, looked in the windows. The only issue is it didn't have eyes. You know, and so in so many of these faceless encounters, they're still behaving like, you know, they've got one. They're looking, they're seeing, quote unquote. But there's simply nothing there. And so I think that, you know, really, that's something too where it's a dead giveaway that whatever we're looking at is not exactly, you know, physical in the sense that we understand it. You know, it's not performing exactly as it should, and that it is some sort of mask. And the truth behind it, I mean, that's the big question. But I know, I've wondered too, why does that happen sometimes? Because especially, you know, you have so many encounters with ghosts that appear faceless. And, you know, that's just intriguing to me too, because, you know, you think that, okay, you're in this location that has, you know, a certain history, you can almost anticipate that you'll be seeing a ghost. I mean, again, not anticipate that, but if you're going to see something anomalous, you'd think that's kind of what you'd fall back on. But still, you end up having these just totally devoid, faceless beings.
Also, can't you not... When you're dreaming, you have to make up faces out of bits of faces that you've actually seen, right?
Yeah, it has to be cataloged somewhere.
You can't just generate a brand new face.
Which makes me wonder about some dreams I've had.
Right?
Yeah.
But
that may explain why you see someone that you don't know in real life or in waking life, but in the dream you know them. It's probably because their faces are parts of a bunch of people's faces.
But could maybe they're just, if there's not a belief structure mask to reach for, we can't make a face out of our subconscious.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't project or like even, you know, whatever catalog we have for some reason doesn't reach whatever this is. Yeah. The funny thing is... Oh, no, go on, sorry.
Okay. Or like you posit, they're just not done materializing yet.
Yeah, the funny thing is that really occurred to me, actually, strangely enough, from a dream that my mom had, because she had this dream. We, of course, at breakfast we always, hey, what did you dream about last night? Oh, this, that, and the other. And so she had this dream that she was reading a book, and then she realized, hey, I'm dreaming, and the book went completely blank. And that was what kind of kicked off that line of reasoning for me, is that, if these things do rely on us somehow to project a certain mask or to project an image, for some reason with some people, maybe, like you're saying, they don't have such strong presets, or maybe it does have something almost to do with like ESP ability. I don't really know. That just makes the image unable to kind of load in time. And so what they're left with is something which objectively is a lot more terrifying, and that is this just faceless being.
But it's just a blue screen of death.
Yeah,
Because it's loading.
It's too bad they wouldn't have the little like loading circles,
Right? Then we would all feel so much better.
I'm like, oh, okay, I'll wait.
We just need to update your OS, guys.
I swear, if we start seeing reports like this, I blame this conversation.
Yes. If we start seeing the little spinny icon and blue faceless people, we'll know.
Oh, I'm scared now.
I was just thinking that one of my favorite things is the prevalence of hooded and cowled and cloaked figures. Not just in ghostly sightings, but in cryptid sightings and in UFO sightings or UFO related sightings. And of course, fairy sightings. That to me speaks of, what is that particular archetype? Because we see them here in the United States where we didn't have a whole bunch of monks and nuns running about. That was more of a Europe thing. I mean, we do have them, but not to the extent.
Not to the extent, yeah.
We don't have thousands of years of church.
No, we do not. We have
that has stood out
hundred.
to me too. And that is enough. I'm sorry. Anyways, no, that stood out to me too. And the interesting thing, again, kind of like the faceless beings, is you get the same silhouette over and over and over again. And the details will change, but it's that basic almost pattern that remains the same. Again, whether we're looking at any of the big three fields. And I think the interesting thing with the hooded thing is, to me, immediately that calls to mind that which is concealed. There's an element of like, you can't see the form underneath. Because that one in particular stood out to me too. And one of these days I'm finally going to pin down and compile, okay, what are like the big like main silhouettes that you're looking at here? And just toss hundreds of cases into each pile. That'll be a lot of work.
You remember in World War II they made the airplane spotter cards? You should make... that would be beautiful. That would be awesome.
Great. Oh my god.
The common silhouette spotter cards.
That would be fantastic. Because I know the hooded one
entities.
The thing that got me is I was reading a Bigfoot encounter where they said that its hair was like a cloak. And I'm like,
yes.
Hold up. Wait a sec.
I was like,
and then of course,
whoa.
There's this Banshee encounter. Of course, the Banshee usually appears with a veil. But then there was this particular one where they said it looked like she was draped in a fine gauze from head to toe. And it just, again, it starts sprawling out through all of these other encounters to the point where you're just like, okay, there's something to this. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I love the hoods and the cloaks, and because in the Hudson Valley River Valley sightings in the late 80s, there was a pond, and there were seen little 4.5, 5 foot tall guys in black cloaks with red eyes.
Yeah.
But no faces.
Oh, that's right.
And
that is right.
With UFOs that came in and out of the water, Again, there's water.
Yeah.
Water is a big thing in the paranormal. It really is. But who are these little red-eyed monk guys? What's up with that in New York?
And affiliated with UFOs.
Right.
Yeah.
UFOs that come in and out of the water. And it's not a very big pond lake thing. It's not a large body of water either.
That's
So it's weird.
And you brought up another of my favorite aspects. Thank you. Is that so often? See, I swear every of these aspects is my favorite. Just like, I'm always like, oh yeah, and here's my upcoming favorite case. Just like the case before, which was also my favorite.
I understand this.
I'm
like that with
really are
cheese.
A crow. You're
Yeah.
a crow.
Yeah, pretty
All the
much.
shinies are my favorites because they're all shiny in a different way.
Especially the one I'm looking at.
Exactly, because
Right.
that's the best.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Until I look over there.
And then that one's the best. I completely
Yeah.
understand. I am like that.
Oh
with
yeah. Thank
everything.
you. I'm glad to know I'm not alone with that.
No, Mom's like that with cheese. I'm like that with books.
And shiny things. I have an
And
awful lot
shiny
of jewelry.
things. Yes,
Oh,
you do
oh,
have
man.
an atrocious amount of jewelry. Like,
We will have to compare collections. I'm guilty of that as well. But no, another of my favorite aspects. It's kind of, to me, and I used this term in the Winston, Connecticut encounter. It's like the monster in the closet concept. A lot of these beings or craft, or the beings in the craft, it's like they don't fit into
Yes.
where they claim to be going. It's kind of like when people, like you were talking about Bigfoot, hiding behind one lone shrub in the middle of London. This doesn't make sense.
That can't be where you live, sir.
No.
It's not big enough for you, sir.
Or the kids they're following this 7-foot tall being into this tiny metallic hut that they had to crawl to get into. It just, in so many of these
But then
cases,
it has 2 floors.
Exactly. There's some sort of space distortion, honestly, kind of like the TARDIS,
Yeah.
And you see that a lot, especially, bringing up the small, tiny little pond that these things were flying into. I remember, I love Ivan T. Sanderson. His book, Invisible Residents, I do think that...
Oh, that's a great one.
It's fantastic. But he talks about, and he was really at that time, I think, invested in the concept of the cryptoterrestrial idea, that there may have been some sort of, secret race of humanoids coexisting with us. And, I remember him delineating how, well, the appearances of these huge craft going into small bodies of water, that's not actually where they live. That's just like a way station. And I'm like, how many way stations and how many times is this going to happen? And how many, times does it look like this thing is claiming that, yeah, no, this is where I am, before you realize this isn't what we're really seeing. This isn't what we're really looking at. So yeah, that's another of my favorite concepts.
Or there's a really big hole in the bottom of that pond that goes to another universe somewhere else. That's
Exactly.
a lot bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
to our
it-
subconscious.
Exactly. It's just, kind of the rampant nonsense of all these encounters is just that probably is the umbrella term for all of my favorite little threads. Just
Oh, yeah.
rampant nonsense.
It can be
And there
so
is a lot of it.
fun. Like, especially when, because, I will go through phases where I read a great deal about the paranormal in a row for, several months
Oh,
at a
yeah.
time. And the high strangeness of just sheer nonsense within it is, such a nice, dessert sandwiched in between, really disturbing stuff.
Yeah.
That scares the bejesus out of you, and then you get super high strangeness, and it's still uncanny, and it's
Yeah.
still bizarre, but it's not that church in the Middle Ages that the black dog ran in and clawed the door really badly,
Yeah.
and bolts of lightning came through the church roof and killed people.
Yeah, Bungay and
Yeah.
Blytheburg. Same
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the church that an anchor fell down and hit the roof, and then a little dude came down a rope that the anchor was attached to and went to cut it, and then he fell down and drowned in the air.
Yeah.
What? What is that? I read that as a kid and I was like, the world is an amazing place. Man,
Yeah.
that's so cool. And then relate it to my grandfather at the dinner table, and he just looked at me. Said, "Oh, how
that's
interesting." Great. And then he said, "That's why I don't go to church." Like that made some sense. Well, that's why I don't go to church.
Oh, hey, it's happened before, it'll happen again, you know? I mean,
yeah.
I don't entirely blame anybody for that, because there's cannibalism that happens in there.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
If you take it literally, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oof. This is what studying early, like, medieval history does to you. Like, you get really, really touchy about the miracle of transubstantiation.
Oh. Yeah. Many lifetimes ago, I was Catholic, and unfortunately, one of my greatest fears in life is cannibalism.
Oh, no!
Oh,
I've gotten
dear.
over both. I'm happy to now. I'm joking.
Oh, dear.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, no. Oh. Well.
Oh, man.
Anything else anybody wants to hop in with?
You got to tell us where we can get your book. Well, we don't need any more copies of it, but other people need copies of it.
And we're not giving you ours.
Yeah, we have all of our copies, and where they can find you on the internets, and what else you'll be doing in the near future.
Of course. So the book, Just Another Tinfoil Hat Presents, from Beyond the Fray Publishing, is my pride and joy, and it is available on Amazon.com. So yeah, and then as far as if you're trying to find me, just look up Just Another Tinfoil Hat and you will come across me eventually. My website is justanothertinfoilhat.com, and then I'm also on YouTube as, surprisingly, Just Another Tinfoil Hat. So yeah, if you look up that handful of words, you'll find me eventually. And then as far as upcoming projects, I am very pleased to announce I have signed for a sequel to my book with Beyond the Fray. So look out for that probably later this year, I imagine, which I'm, again, super surreal, very happy about.
Excellent.
Yeah, so beyond that, I'll be speaking at the Beast of Bray Road celebration at the end of April, which really excited about that because, of course, I mean, Linda Godfrey is one of my idols, and seriously, she absolutely changed my life when I was a kid, and her work was just inspiring to me. So yeah, I'm very, very excited to have been invited to that. So yeah, and then other than that, just keeping up on the channel. So tons of new cases coming up in the near future.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for coming to see us. Always love to have you.
For real. You are always welcome in our virtual living room.
Yes. Yes. And if you ever want to come back, just give us a holler.
Well, thank you guys. You two are awesome. It's just, seriously, this was such a fantastic conversation. So thank you again for having me on.
Thank you. Well, that's all for this week's episode of the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts about the podcast or would like to come and talk about your experiences of the paranormal, you can contact us at 6djk67@gmail.com. We promise to even answer you, and we are always happy to hear from you.